think sometimes we forget how scary it was, the magnitude of this crisis. We lost 4 million jobs in the 6 months before I was sworn in. 750,000 the month I was sworn in, 600,000 the month after that, 600,000 more the month after that. We lost 8 million jobs during the course of this recession. A once-in-a-generation challenge. And when I was sworn in, it was my profound hope, and I know it was the hope of many of you, not just Democrats, but Republicans. It was the hope of so many people that it would cause both parties to put politics aside for a moment for the sake of the country. The notion was that we could move beyond the division and the bickering and the game playing that had dominated Washington for so long. Because although so many of us are proud to be Democrats, we are prouder to be Americans. We are prouder to be Americans. But the Republican leaders in Washington made a different decision. They made a tactical decision. Their basic theory was that we had gone into such a deep hole. The economy was so badly damaged. They knew it was going to take time for us to repair the economy. They knew it was going to take longer than anybody would like. And they knew the people would be frustrated, and they'd be angry. And some of the enthusiasm that we had seen in the 2008 election would start to dissipate as people looked at their friends losing jobs and their small businesses having to close their doors. And they figured if they just sat on the sidelines long enough, and if they opposed everything that we did, if they said no, even the policies that traditionally they had supported, then they figured that they could ride people's anger and frustration all the way to success in the next election. That was their working theory. In other words, they were basically counting on you forgetting who caused the mess in the first place. And now they're sitting back, and they basically want you to believe that this election is a referendum on the economy, a referendum on me. They don't want you to understand this is a choice, but make no mistake, this election is a choice, and the stakes could not be greater. Because if they win this election, the chair of a Republican campaign committee has promised that they will pursue the exact same agenda as they did before they took office. Now, so just understand, this is not like the Republicans went off and they said, boy, we really screwed up. We've got to rethink everything. And they went off into the desert and they meditated, and then they finally came back with some new ideas. That's not what happened. The very same agenda, and we know what that agenda is. You cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires. You cut rules for special interests, whether it's insurance companies that want to drop your coverage when you get sick, or credit card companies that want to jack up your rates, or Wall Street banks that are dealing in all kinds of derivatives that end up crashing the market. You cut the middle class loose to fend for themselves. They'll tell you it's the ownership society, but basically it's saying you're on your own. If you lose your job, you're on your own. If your child doesn't have health care, tough luck, you're on your own. You're a young person, you can't afford to go to college, too bad. Lift yourself up by your own bootstraps, you're on your own. It's an agenda that turned a record surplus into a record deficit. An agenda that produced slower job growth than we've had this past year. An agenda that let Wall Street run wild at the expense of folks right here on Main Street. An agenda that nearly destroyed the economy. Do they think that we have forgotten? I mean, it's not like we didn't try what they're peddling. We tried it for 8 years. It didn't work. And if they take over Congress, the other side has already promised to roll back health reform so that insurance companies can go back to denying you coverage when you get sick. They want to roll back Wall Street reform so that taxpayers can be on the hook for the next bailout. They want to let credit card companies hit you with hidden fees or penalties. They want to cut education by 20% to help pay for a $700 billion tax break for the wealthiest 2% of Americans, folks who don't need it and wouldn't. Look, this is the same theory they have been peddling for years. And Ohio, it is up to you to tell them we do not want what they are selling. We've been there before and we are not going back. I've been explaining to people around the country, it's as if they drove America's car into the ditch. They drove it into the ditch, and it was a big ditch. And so I came along, and Ted Strickland came along, and we put on our boots, and we went down into the ditch. And it was hot down there, and it was muddy. There were bugs. But we said that's okay. Even though we didn't drive it into the ditch, it's still our responsibility to get that car out of the ditch. And so we pushed, and every once in a while we'd look up, and up on the road you'd see the Republicans standing there, fanning themselves, sipping on a Slurpee, having a latte. And we'd say, hey, why don't you come down and help push a little bit? We need some help down here. And they'd say, no, that's all right. They said, but you need to push harder. You're not pushing the right way. And we just kept on pushing. We kept on pushing. Finally, we get this car up on level ground. It's pointing in the right direction. We're ready to move America forward. But the next thing we know, we get this tap on our shoulder, and we look back, and who is it? It's the Republicans. And they say, we want the keys back. You can't have the keys back. You don't know how to drive. Now, if you want, you can roll with us, but you got to be in the back seat. I don't know if you've noticed, if you want to take your car forward, you got to put it in what? In D. If you want to go backwards, it goes what? We don't want to go backwards. We're moving America forward. Because I love you back. Now, let's examine what's happened over the last 20-something months. Because of the steps we've taken, we no longer face the possibility of a second depression. The economy's growing again. The private sector's created jobs 9 months in a row. But you know what? We still have such a long way to go. We've got so much more work to do. I know there are people out there who are just hanging by a thread, people who are hurting. It's what keeps me up at night. It's what keeps me fighting. But I also know this. The biggest mistake we could make right now, Ohio, is to go back to the very same policies that caused all this hurt in the first place. I mean, think about it for a second. It just doesn't make sense. The other side is counting on all of you having amnesia, just forgetting what happened here. We can't return to a philosophy that nearly destroyed our economy and decimated the middle class right here in Ohio. And I say this not to relitigate the past. I say it because we can't relive the past. And that's what this election's about. Not just where we've been, but where we want to go. Not where we are right now, but where we want to be 10 years from now and 20 years from now. What does America's future look like? What's the work we've got left to do? This election is not just about moving forward versus moving backwards. It's also a contest between our deepest hopes and our deepest fears. And the other side is playing on fear. That's what they do. That's what they do. You see, we Democrats have a different idea about what the future should look like, and it's an idea rooted in our belief about how this country was built. It's based on not just ideas and books, it's based on the lived history of Ted Strickland and Michelle and myself. We didn't come from wealthy families. We didn't come from famous families. We came from working families. We came from some ordinary folks. We had to go to school on scholarships and grants. You know, if we wanted some spending money, we had to work for it. And so we remember the story of our families' lives, and it's a story of your lives. And we know that government doesn't have all the answers to our problems. We believe government should be lean and efficient. But in the words of the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, I'm not sure